The leather jacket hit the concrete with a sound like a gunshot in a cemetery. Sharp, final, wrong. 32 bikers froze mid-conversation in the parking lot of the Memorial Veterans Center, their eyes locked on that battered piece of leather lying there like a corpse, torn at the left shoulder, faded by sun and rain, and 5 years of man who couldn't let go of the only thing that had ever meant anything to him. And in the center of that circle of big men, hard men, men covered in tattoos and patches earned through blood and loyalty, stood a 9-year-old girl with unraveling braids and eyes red from crying, her small chest heaving with the kind of grief that doesn't understand words like fair or justice or too late. "This was his," she whispered, and the words fell like stones into still water, rippling outward, touching every man there with the weight of something they tried for 5 years to forget. "This was my daddy's jacket, and he wore it every single day until the day he died, even after you took everything else from him." The sun was setting behind the community center, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if anyone had been paying attention to anything except that jacket and that girl, and the terrible recognition dawning on faces that had seen war and death and loss, but had never quite felt anything like this particular flavor of horror. The kind that comes from realizing you destroyed something precious and called it justice. Bear stood at the front of the group, 6'4" of muscle and gray beard and authority, the Thunder King's president patch on his cut catching the dying light. His face had gone pale beneath his road tan, his jaw working like he was chewing glass. Behind him, Smoke had removed his sunglasses with shaking hands. Diesel had taken a step backward, like he'd been physically pushed. Tommy's young face had crumpled into something that looked like he might be sick right there on the asphalt. Because they all recognized that jacket. They'd recognize it anywhere. It had belonged to Jake Wraith Sullivan, and they had stripped him of the right to wear it with honor 5 years ago in the clubhouse parking lot, in front of witnesses, in front of God and brotherhood, and every sacred thing they'd sworn to uphold. They'd ripped his patches off with their own hands. The Thunder King's rocker, the Skull and Lightning center patch, the bottom rocker with his road name. And they'd told him he was dead to them, banished, a traitor who'd stolen from veterans and orphans and everything the club stood for. And Jake had stood there and taken it, his face carved from stone, his eyes wet, but his voice steady when he'd said, "I didn't do it. I swear on my daughter's life, I didn't do it." But they hadn't believed him. The evidence had been too strong, the betrayal too deep, and they'd turned their backs on him and let him walk away into the Texas twilight wearing that jacket with the empty back, the ghost of patches that would never return. That had been 5 years ago, and now his daughter stood before them with that same jacket, and the look on her face said everything about what those 5 years had cost. The girl, Lily, her name was Lily, Bear remembered now, with a sick lurch in his gut, bent down and picked up the jacket with trembling hands, clutching it to her chest like it was the only solid thing left in a world that had gone liquid and uncertain. She was small for 9, thin in a way that spoke of meals skipped and stress that kids shouldn't have to carry, wearing a dress that was clean but worn and shoes that had seen better days. "My daddy died 3 months ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying across the parking lot with perfect clarity, cutting through the rumble of distant traffic and the buzz of the security light flickering to life overhead. He crashed his bike on Highway 71, out past the state line, where nobody knew him anymore because he couldn't come back here, couldn't ride the roads he loved because you told him if you ever saw him again there'd be consequences. Smoke made a sound like he'd been punched in the throat. "He was investigating," Lily continued, her words coming faster now, tumbling out like she'd been holding them in for too long, and they were finally breaking free. "Every weekend, every spare minute he had after working double shifts at the warehouse, because no motorcycle shop would hire him once word got out what he'd supposedly done. He was investigating. He had files, notebooks, receipts, bank statements, witness statements. He never stopped trying to prove he didn't steal that money. He never stopped trying to clear his name so he could." Her voice broke completely, and she buried her face in the jacket, her small shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her body. Bear felt like the ground had opened beneath his boots. Around him, his brothers stood frozen in various poses of dawning horror, men who'd faced down rival clubs and bar fights, and the worst humanity had to offer, now rendered absolutely helpless by a 9-year-old girl and the truth they'd been too proud, too certain, too goddamn stupid to see 5 years ago. Lily. Bear's voice came out rough as gravel in a cement mixer. He took a step forward, his hands raised in a gesture that was half plea, half surrender. Lily, sweetheart, you didn't believe him. She lifted her face from the jacket, and the accusation in her red-rimmed eyes was more devastating than any punch Bear had ever taken. He came to you with respect. He opened the books for you. He showed you everything he had access to, everything he'd done as treasurer, and you still didn't believe him. You believed whoever told you he was guilty, and you threw him away like garbage, and you never even tried to find out if you were wrong. The words hung in the air like an indictment, and not a single man there could argue with them, because they were absolutely, horrifically true. It had been Colt who'd brought the accusation, Colt Reaper Morrison, the club's sergeant-at-arms, a 20-year member with a reputation for being harder than coffin nails and twice as mean when crossed. He'd come to Bear with bank statements showing transfers from the charity account to what appeared to be Jake's personal account. He'd had timestamps, transaction records, everything lined up neat and damning. And Jake had been the treasurer, had access to the accounts, had the opportunity, and they'd thought at the time, maybe the motive, given that his wife had left him 6 months earlier and he'd been struggling with child support payments. It had seemed airtight. They'd never considered that it might be a setup. Never questioned whether someone else might have access. Never dug deeper than the surface evidence because Jake was relatively new. Only 2 years in the club, still proving himself. And Colt was old guard, respected, trusted without question. They'd made their decision in 24 hours, held the stripping ceremony within 48, and sent Jake into exile believing they'd done the right thing, believing they protected the club's integrity and honor. And Jake had spent 5 years trying to prove them wrong, dying alone on a highway with nothing but his innocence and a jacket full of ghost patches and a daughter who would grow up knowing her father had been destroyed by the very men he'd wanted to call brothers. He kept files, Lily said again, her voice steadier now, hardening into something that looked far too adult on her young face. He tracked everything. He found witnesses who saw someone else accessing the accounts. He found a burner phone that was used to make the transfers. She stopped abruptly, her eyes moving past Bear to someone in the crowd behind him. Her face transformed, grief and anger crystallizing into something cold and focused and absolutely certain. He found out who really did it, she said quietly. And that person is standing right here, right now, wearing patches my daddy should have been wearing, pretending to be a brother when he's nothing but a thief and a liar. The parking lot went absolutely silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the harsh breathing of 32 men who suddenly didn't know which way to look, who to suspect, how to process this information that was rewriting everything they thought they knew about honor and brotherhood and the worst mistake they'd ever made. Bear's blood ran cold. Lily, what are you saying? She reached into the pocket of her dress with her free hand, the other still clutching the jacket like a lifeline, and pulled out a manila envelope, worn at the edges, bulging with what looked like documents. Her father's handwriting was scrawled across the front in black marker. For the Thunder Kings, the truth about the charity theft. My daddy made me promise, Lily said, her eyes shining with fresh tears, but her voice steady as bedrock, that if anything ever happened to him, if he didn't make it home one day, I should bring this to you. He said even though you broke his heart, even though you took everything from him, you deserve to know the truth. He said real brothers don't lie, even when they've been lied to. She held out the envelope toward Bear with both hands now, the jacket draped over her arms like a flag over a coffin, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone there. The jacket that represented everything Jake had lost, carrying the evidence that would prove his innocence 3 months too late to matter. Delivered by the daughter who would live the rest of her life knowing her father had died, trying to reclaim honor that should never have been taken from him in the first place. Bear took the envelope with hands that trembled, this giant of a man reduced to something small and broken by the weight of what he was holding. The paper was warm from being pressed against Lily's body, warmed by the same sun that had warmed her father's body 3 months ago before they'd lowered him into the ground with a service attended by exactly 7 people. Lily, her grandmother, 3 cousins, and 2 old friends from before the club, before the accusations, before everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. "Open it," Lily whispered. "Read it. See what it cost him to find the truth. See what you took from us." And then her voice broke again, but she forced the words out through tears and rage and grief that had been building for 3 months, 5 years, a lifetime of watching her father carry shame that wasn't his to carry. "And then you tell me how you're going to make this right, because I don't know how you can, but my daddy said the Thunder Kings were good men who'd made a bad mistake, and good men fix their mistakes even when it's too late to change what's already broken." Bear's hands shook as he opened the envelope, and around him, his brothers pressed closer, every face reflecting the same sick dread, the same growing certainty that they were about to discover they'd committed the worst sin a brotherhood could commit. They'd betrayed one of their own based on lies, and he'd died without ever hearing them say they were sorry, without ever getting back what they'd taken, without ever riding again with his colors and his pride and his place in the formation. The first document that slid out was a bank statement, highlighted in yellow marker, with notes in Jake's careful handwriting pointing out discrepancies in transfer times, IP addresses that didn't match his home computer, login locations that put the account access nowhere near where Jake had been on the dates in question. The second was a printout of text messages between 2 people. One number Jake had labeled Burner, purchased at Walgreens on South Street, March 2019, and another he'd labeled Thunder Kings member, identity confirmed. The third was a photograph, grainy but clear enough, showing a man at an ATM, his face visible in the machine's security camera, making a withdrawal from what the receipt timestamp showed was the exact moment $5,000 had disappeared from the charity account. And the face in that photograph, the face that had haunted Jake Sullivan through 5 years of investigation and shame and exile. It belonged to Colt Reaper Morrison, Sergeant-at-Arms of the Thunder Kings, the man who'd brought the accusation in the first place, the man they trusted without question, the man who was standing right now at the edge of the crowd with a face that had gone white as bone beneath his tan, his eyes wide and desperate and guilty as hell. Bear's vision tunneled. The documents slipped from his hands, scattering across the concrete beside Jake's jacket, beside his daughter who stood watching with ancient eyes, waiting to see if the Thunder Kings would prove her father right or wrong about who they really were beneath the leather and patches and promises they'd made to each other about brotherhood and honor and never leaving a man behind. "Colt," Bear said, and his voice was empty of everything except cold, bottomless rage. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is. Tell me you didn't do this. Tell me we didn't destroy an innocent man because you." But Colt was already backing away, his hands raised, his mouth working but no words coming out, and the guilt written across his face was answer enough, confession enough, damnation enough. And in that moment, as the sun finished setting and the parking lot lights buzzed to full brightness and 31 Thunder Kings realized they'd been played, manipulated, turned against their own brother by one of their own who'd stolen and lied and let an innocent man take the fall. In that moment, they understood exactly what Lily had meant when she'd said they'd realized the truth too late. Because Jake Wraith Sullivan was 3 months in the ground, and no amount of truth or justice or apology would ever bring him back. Block 2. Colt ran. It was the worst thing he could have done, the only thing that confirmed every damning piece of evidence scattered across that parking lot like accusations made of paper and ink. He turned and bolted toward the back of the building, his boots pounding against asphalt, his cut flapping behind him like the wings of something trying desperately to escape gravity and failing, already fallen. He made it maybe 20 feet before Diesel caught him. The impact sounded like a car crash. 240 pounds of former Marine linebacker hitting Colt from behind with the full force of betrayal and rage driving every muscle. They went down hard, skidding across the pavement, and then Diesel had him pinned, one massive forearm across Colt's throat, the other hand drawn back in a fist that trembled with the effort of not following through, not finishing what every cell in his body was screaming at him to do. "Don't!" Bear's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Don't give him that. He doesn't get to be the victim here. He doesn't get knocked out, so he can avoid facing what he's done. Diesel's fist stayed raised for 3 more seconds, 3 seconds that felt like hours, before he slowly lowered it and hauled Colt to his feet by his collar, gripping the leather so tight his knuckles went white. The sergeant-at-arms patch on Colt's cut seemed to mock them all now. That symbol of trust and authority and the responsibility to protect the club transformed into evidence of the deepest betrayal imaginable. The other bikers had formed a circle without even realizing it, blocking any other escape route, their faces carved from stone and fury. Tommy looked like he was crying, actually crying, tears cutting tracks through the road, dust on his young face. Smoke had his hands clenched at his sides, the veins in his forearms standing out like cables under tension. Preacher, the oldest of them all, had removed his sunglasses to reveal eyes that had seen death in Vietnam and never quite looked the same afterward. And those eyes were fixed on Colt with an expression that suggested death might be merciful compared to what he was thinking. But it was Bear who walked forward slowly, deliberately, each step measured and heavy, until he stood directly in front of Colt. The club president was shaking, not with fear or uncertainty, but with the kind of rage that comes from realizing you've been made a fool of, that you've hurt people under false pretenses, that you've failed every single responsibility you'd sworn to uphold. How much? Bear's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried. How much of the 15,000 did you actually steal? Colt's mouth opened and closed. Blood trickled from his split lip where he'd hit the pavement. His eyes darted to Lily, still standing there clutching her father's jacket, and something in her young face, some combination of grief and vindication and pure, righteous anger, made him flinch and look away. All of it, he finally said, his voice cracked and small. All 15,000. A collective intake of breath, like 31 men had been punched simultaneously in the gut. Why? Smoke's voice broke on the word. Jesus Christ, Colt, why? You were making good money. You had the shop you had. Gambling debts. Colt's admission came out flat, dead. I got in deep with some people in Dallas. Bad people. They were going to... He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter. There's no excuse. I took the money. And when Jake started asking questions, when he noticed the accounts didn't match up, his voice dropped even lower. I panicked. I had access to his computer when he left it at the clubhouse one night. I set up the transfers to look like they came from his IP address. I created a paper trail that pointed to him. And I brought it to you, Bear, because I knew you'd believe me. I was old guard. He was new. It was easy. Easy, Bear repeated, and the words sounded like a curse. You set up an innocent man, destroyed his reputation, took away the one thing that meant everything to him, and it was easy. Lily's voice cut through before Colt could respond. Tell them the rest. She was looking directly at Colt now, and despite the tears still wet on her cheeks, there was steel in her expression, a strength inherited from a father who'd spent 5 years fighting alone for a truth nobody wanted to hear. Tell them what happened when my daddy came to see you. 2 years ago. Tell them what you did. Colt's face, already pale, went gray. Lily, please. Tell them. Her shout echoed off the community center walls, and every man there flinched at the raw pain in it. Tell them how my daddy tracked you down, how he confronted you with evidence, how he begged you to just tell the truth so he could come home, so he could clear his name, so he could stop living like he was guilty of something he never did. The silence that followed was suffocating. Colt's shoulders sagged, and when he spoke, it was to the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. He found me at a bar in Waco. 18 months ago, not 2 years. He had files, photographs, some of the same stuff that's in that envelope. He said he'd give me one chance to come clean, to go to Bear together and tell the truth. And he'd even vouch for me, say I made a mistake but was trying to make it right. His laugh was bitter, self-loathing. Can you imagine? I destroyed his life, and he was offering me redemption. What did you do? Bear's voice was dead, already knowing the answer, already seeing where this was going. I told him if he came near the club, if he told anyone what he thought he knew, I'd make sure he never rode again. I had connections with other clubs, with shops, with people who could make his life even worse than it already was. I told him his daughter was 9 years old and accidents happen to little girls who have fathers that don't know when to keep their mouths shut. The parking lot exploded. Diesel's fist connected with Colt's jaw before anyone could stop him, a crack like a baseball bat hitting concrete. Tommy was shouting something incoherent. Hammer and Six String had a physically restrained preacher, who at 67 was still trying to get his hand around Colt's throat. The circle of bikers surged forward, and for a moment it looked like Colt Morrison was about to be torn apart by the very brothers he'd ridden with for 20 years. "Stop!" Bear's roar cut through the chaos. Everybody stop. The authority in his voice was absolute. The Thunder Kings froze, breathing hard, fists clenched, every face twisted with rage and grief and the sick realization of what they'd been part of, what they'd enabled through their blind trust and their refusal to question. "We don't do this," Bear said, his voice shaking but firm. "We don't become animals. We don't sink to his level." He turned to look at each of his brothers in turn. "What we do is face what we've done. What we do is own our part in this. Because, yeah, Colt lied and manipulated and threatened, but we believed him without digging deeper. We took the word of one brother over another without real investigation. We stripped Jake's patches in front of witnesses and sent him into exile and never once followed up to make absolutely certain we'd gotten it right." Bear smoke started. "No," Bear cut him off. "No excuses. No justifications. We failed Jake Sullivan. Every single one of us. And because of that failure, because of our pride and our certainty and our refusal to admit we might have been wrong, he's dead. He died without his colors. He died without his brothers. He died without his daughter ever getting to see him ride with the respect and honor he deserved." The words fell like hammer blows, each one driving home the magnitude of what they'd done, what they'd lost, what could never be recovered or repaired. Lily's voice, when it came, was small but clear. "He never stopped loving you." Every head turned toward her. She was crying openly now, but she held her father's jacket up like a banner, like a flag carried into battle. "Even after you kicked him out, even after you call him a thief and a traitor, even after Mr. Morrison threatened me and made Daddy too scared to fight back anymore, he never stopped loving the Thunder Kings. He had pictures of you all on his wall. He watched your charity rides from a distance. When I asked him why he still cared about people who'd hurt him so bad, you know what he said? Nobody answered. Nobody could. He said that real brotherhood doesn't die just because people make mistakes. He said you were good men who'd been lied to, and good men deserve the truth even if they don't always recognize it right away." He said, her voice cracked, but she pushed through. He said that if anything happened to him, I should bring you his evidence and his jacket, and I should tell you that he forgave you, because that's what brothers do. They forgive. The sound that came from Bear was something between a sob and a growl. He dropped to his knees in front of Lily, this mountain of a man brought down by the grace of a dead brother and the courage of a 9-year-old girl. "We don't deserve that," he said, his voice breaking. "We don't deserve his forgiveness or his love or anything except his hate. But I swear to you, Lily Sullivan, I swear on everything sacred, we're going to make this right. We can't bring him back. We can't give you back the years you lost or the father who should still be here. But we're going to clear his name. We're going to tell everyone what really happened. And we're going to make sure Jake Wraith Sullivan is remembered as what he really was, a Thunder King who never broke faith, even when faith broke him." Lily looked at him for a long moment, this giant of a man kneeling before her with tears cutting tracks through his weathered face. Then slowly, carefully, she held out her father's jacket. "Then put his patches back," she whispered. "Make him whole again, even if it's too late for him to see it. Make him whole." Bear took the jacket with trembling hands. The leather was soft from years of wear, marked with road rash from the accident that had killed Jake, stained with oil and rain and the sweat of man who'd worn it like armor against a world that had turned against him. The back was empty, the ghost outlines of where patches had once been still visible in the unfaded leather beneath. "Smoke," Bear said quietly. "Get the patch kit from my saddlebag. Get the Thunder King's rockers, the center patch, the bottom rocker with his name. Get the memorial patch, too, the one we give to brothers who've passed. And one more thing," Diesel added, his voice rough. Get the Sergeant-at-Arms patch, because that position just opened up, and it needs to be filled by someone who actually understands what honor means. Colt made a sound like he'd been gutted. Two bikers, hammer and six-string, grabbed him and physically tore his cut off, ripping the Sergeant-at-Arms patch free along with every other patch he'd worn. They threw the empty leather vest on the ground like garbage, and nobody moved to pick it up. While they waited for Smoke to return with the patches, Bear looked up at the assembled Thunder Kings. Tomorrow morning, we ride. Full chapter. We ride to Jake Sullivan's grave, and we conduct a full memorial service with honors. We restore his colors posthumously. We tell his story the way it should have been told 5 years ago. And we make sure every club, every shop, every rider in Texas knows that Jake Ray Sullivan was innocent, was honorable, and was one of us. What about him? Tommy jerked his head toward Colt, who stood between two bikers looking like a man being held up by executioners. We turn him over to the police, Bear said. Grand theft, fraud, witness intimidation, terroristic threats against a minor. Let the law handle him. He doesn't get a brother's judgment. He doesn't get the dignity of club justice. He gets what every common criminal gets: handcuffs and a cage and time to think about what he destroyed. Smoke returned with the patches and his sewing kit. In the harsh parking lot lights, with 31 witnesses and one small girl, Bear laid Jake Sullivan's jacket on the hood of his truck and began to sew. His hands, scarred and rough from decades of road and work, moved with surprising delicacy, each stitch placed with care, with reverence, with the weight of apology and regret and love that came 5 years and 3 months too late. The Thunder King's rocker went on first, curve across the top of the back, black and chrome and proud. Then the center patch, the skull and lightning that marked a full member. Then the bottom rocker with Wraith in bold letters. And finally, the memorial patch, the small banner that read, "Forever a Brother," that they placed on fallen members to mark their passage from the road to whatever lay beyond. When it was finished, when Jake's jacket was whole again, Bear held it up in the light. Complete. Restored. A warrior's colors returned to him in death because his brothers had been too blind to give them back in life. He walked to Lily and knelt again, holding out the jacket. "This belongs to you now," he said softly. "And when you're old enough, if you want it, there's a place for you in the Thunder King's family. Not as a rider. You don't have to earn what's already yours by blood. But as family, as the daughter of a brother who showed us what real honor looks like. We owe you that. We owe him that." Lily took the jacket, her small hands barely able to hold it all, and pressed her face into leather that smelled like her father. Motor oil and leather conditioner and Old Spice and the specific scent of the man who'd tucked her in at night and told her stories about the road and promised her that someday, he'd take her riding on Sunday mornings to get ice cream and see the mountains. "Thank you," she whispered into the leather. "Daddy he would have been so happy." The Thunder King stood there in that parking lot as the night deepened around them. 31 men facing the worst truth a brotherhood can face. That they'd failed someone who trusted them. That they'd been the villains in someone else's story. That all their talk of honor and loyalty and brotherhood had meant nothing when tested against lies told by someone they trusted without question. But they also faced something else in that moment. The possibility of redemption, not through forgetting, but through remembering. Through telling Jake's story. Through carrying his name forward with the honor it deserved. Through being better, doing better, questioning harder, digging deeper, never again taking the easy answer when a brother's life hung in the balance. The next morning, 32 Harleys rolled out from the Thunder King's clubhouse in formation. 31 living riders and one empty space in the line. Right between Bear's Road King and Smoke Softail, the space Jake Sullivan should have filled, the space that now carried only his memory and the sound of an engine that would never fire again. They rode to Peaceful Rest Cemetery on the outskirts of town, and they parked their bikes in a circle around a simple granite headstone that read, "Jacob Jake Sullivan, beloved father," with dates that marked a life cut far too short. Lily stood at the grave with her grandmother, both of them wearing black, both of them crying as Bear placed Jake's restored jacket on the grave, fully patched, fully honored. Everything it should have been 5 years ago. And then Bear did something no Thunder King's president had ever done in the club's 40-year history. He removed his own cut, heavy with patches and authority and the weight of leadership, and he knelt at Jake Sullivan's grave with his head bowed. "Brother," he said, his voice carrying across the cemetery, "we failed you. We believed lies over truth. We chose pride over investigation. We took the easy road instead of the right one. And because of that, you died alone without your colors, without your brothers, without the respect and honor that was always yours by right. There's no apology big enough. There's no words that make this okay. But I swear to you here, in front of your daughter and your brothers and God himself, we will carry your name with honor. We will tell your story, and we will never, ever forget the cost of our mistake." One by one, the other Thunder Kings removed their cuts and knelt, 31 men in black t-shirts and jeans, stripped of their colors in solidarity with the brother they'd stripped unjustly. And they stayed that way for 5 full minutes while Lily recited the Lord's Prayer in a thin, clear voice that didn't break even once, because she was Jake Sullivan's daughter, and Sullivans didn't break. They bent, they grieved, they fought, but they didn't break. When they finally stood and put their cuts back on, there was a new patch on each one, a small memorial banner with Jake's road name and the dates of his life. Every Thunder King would carry it from that day forward. A reminder, a penance, a promise to do better. As they prepared to ride out, Lily tugged on Bear's vest. He knelt down, and she leaned in close to whisper in his ear, "What happens to Mr. Morrison?" "He goes to jail," Bear said gently. "For a long time." "Good." There was no mercy in her voice, just the hard justice of someone who'd watched her father die, fighting for a truth nobody wanted to hear. Daddy said forgiveness is for brothers. He never called Mr. Morrison that. Not once. Bear pulled her into a hug, this small, fierce girl who'd brought them the truth at the cost of reliving her own grief. "Your father was a wise man," he said, "and you're his daughter through and through." 3 weeks later, the Thunder Kings held their largest charity ride in club history, the Jake Wraith Sullivan Memorial Ride for veterans and families. 247 motorcycles showed up from clubs all across Texas, all of them riding for a brother they'd never met, but whose story had spread like wildfire through the riding community. The man who'd been betrayed, exiled, and forgotten, but who'd never stopped fighting for truth even when truth couldn't save him. They raised $47,000 for veterans' families. They told Jake's story at every stop, and they made damn sure that every rider, every club, every person who heard about Jake Sullivan knew exactly what kind of man he'd been: honorable, loyal, faithful to the end, a Thunder King who'd worn the patch in his heart long after it was ripped from his back. Lily rode that day on the back of Bear's Road King, wearing her father's jacket with the patches restored, her small arms wrapped tight around the waist of the man who'd failed her father but was trying, finally, to make things right. The jacket was too big for her, hanging almost to her knees, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. But she wore it with pride, with grief, with the certain knowledge that her father was riding with them somehow, finally restored, finally honored, finally home. And if you asked any of the Thunder Kings about the patch they all wore with Jake Sullivan's name, they'd tell you the same thing. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't sentimentality. It was a reminder that brotherhood means nothing if it isn't backed by truth, that loyalty means nothing if it isn't tempered with wisdom, and that the worst a club can commit isn't allowing a thief into their ranks. It's destroying an innocent man and calling it justice. Jake Wraith Sullivan taught them that. His daughter made sure they learned it, and they would carry that lesson and his name until the last Thunder King took his last ride and the club patch was finally retired to whatever place good brothers go when the road finally, mercifully, ends.